Hello, everybody. Hello, Guy.
Hey Dave, how's it going, bro?
We are coming live. I'm again still in the Noordwest province, guys down in KZN, and it's lovely to have one of my one of my best friends and fellow uh, cosmonaut and
Never been called a cosmonaut before. I think I quite like it.
um, but yeah, it's lovely to have Guy on. If you don't know who Guy is, you'll soon find out. But I think what's most important about Guy is that he's a lovely human being. Um, and then on top of that, he's got mad skills as a musician, and
Mhm.
more importantly, as a linguist of the birds, um, and a few other wonderful things. But
I currently have my phone propped up on top of like two different bird books, actually, but not three, to try and get the height there. So I'm kind of staring at birds as much as I am you.
um, so Guy, hello. Thank you for doing this with me. And
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's nice to see your face so early in the morning.
yeah, it's relatively early. I take a while to. I'm a bit slow, I think
You look
generally,
remarkable,
and
absolutely remarkable.
I I think I've got like circulation problems, which is why I need to do the movement stuff. But I mean, I've moved this morning. I've walked, but I'm still a bit. I look like a what is that animal? A mole.
I was going to go with raccoon.
Either, yeah, same. Ooh, who's that behind you there, bro?
The tempura.
Yeah. Oh well, no.
Be the other.
Give us a jingle on the tempura, just so people know that you're actually a real musician.
Oh well, I mean, this is just a four-string. I don't know if you can hear that.
Lovely. I think that needs to be the official jingle for the podcast. Wow, look at that.
And that is Deepak Ram, one of my favorite
Yeah,
Bansuri players of the time. He plays the bamboo flute, and that album,
is one of the greatest of
such
all
a
time.
album, literally changed my life. I think it came out in '99 or 2000, and I don't know how old I was, like a teen at the time, and that just
Yeah,
just insane playing, insane tracks,
it's beautiful.
beautiful, beautiful guitar player on that record too, whose name I don't know, but it's a wonderful album.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find out who that is. It's a nice place to start the podcast because you
Mm.
you introduced me to that album a few years ago, and it's yeah.
Mm.
For those who don't know, it's on Spotify, and it's you never go
Something else.
back. Yeah,
Yeah, you go back. And the one that came out after that, Beauty and Diversity, I think it's called.
yeah, that's also really beautiful. It's quite
That's
jazzy.
just
It's a bit
yeah, and it's got Ian Herman playing drums, who I love. It's one of my
yeah.
favorite drummers. It's a killer record.
Um, so for those who don't know, Deepak Ram is South African, right? He
He
is
is, yeah. He studied in India. He studied with Pandit
Charissa.
Chaurasia, yeah,
How do you say it?
and Chaurasia, and but he used to lecture at the University of Westville in KZN, from what
Wow.
I've heard. But yeah, I think he's been in the
What
US for a long time.
what did he lecture?
I don't know. It was a long time ago. I'm not sure what he was lecturing.
Wow.
Might have been Indian studies. I'm not sure. But yeah, amazing player.
Mm, mm,
Mm.
amazing. So I mean, so I will just get it clear. I mean, I'll write it in the introduction. But Guy, for those who don't know, Guy is a remarkable musician, um, a lifelong musician, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Um, it's kind of the main focus, I guess, for this episode is I kind of want to say art and craft and what makes someone exceptionally exceptional at what they do. Kind of what are the factors and elements that go into it. And I think one of the interesting things that we've really connected on is a kind of deep love for South Africa and its diversity and its heritage and its history. And both of us, I mean, you a bit more than me, but spent a lot of time, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, and just such a vibrant ecosystem, such a just so vast and just like subtropical, and then just the greatest mountain range in the country, and forest, Afro-montane forests, and interesting kind of midland sections, and the people.
We've also got the smallest desert in the world as well.
And smallest desert in the world. Yeah.
I love that.
And I think that's what I connected with so strongly, because basically for everyone, I'll just make a very honest, what's the word? Confession? I don't know. But basically, I'm just
scared to see what you're going to say. What are you going to say? Confession? David.
I'm just a super fanboy, basically. I was at Hilton in KZN, and we used to sneak into your shows with Nibs in the chapel and not buy tickets, and then sneak out before anyone knew. And I think we pirated one of your CDs a few times, as well as Cabins in the Forest with Gary and Andy, and I think a few others. But anyway, so there was for me, there was this this massive focus on KZN, songs from the cane fields, Fox Hill Lane, all the references through all the albums, obviously the artwork and the photographs, and then live in KwaZulu, and then you start to put these pieces together. And I think one of the things that I find as a common thread through all the people that I'm having on the podcast is that they have a deep love, or at least a deep acknowledgement for their roots, and that kind of started at a very young age. I mean, just you mentioning their Deepak Ram in 99 or 2000, that's 20 or 21 years ago. So you're in your teens. So maybe, I don't know if anything what I said just makes sense, but I feel like it does. And if you could just kind of chat a little bit about that, just the that sense of the environment that you grew up in.
Yeah, it was also just a process of osmosis, really. It was basically just tapping into what was immediately around me. I suppose it was maybe, in hindsight, the easiest thing to do, certainly the most natural, kind of just organically unfolded. And I suppose I was fortunate that my two older brothers were really into great music, and they exposed me to a bunch of stuff. I remember my brother came home with Madala Kunini's Konkoman album, and I remember hearing that and just being like, what is this sound? Simultaneously so foreign, but also quite familiar. And then because of that kind of journey, just the whole world of all of that South African music opened up. There was certainly a keen interest on stuff that was being made here. I think primarily because for me it was just really good music. There were just so many great records and musicians, and still are great records and musicians being made, within 100-kilometer radius of anywhere you are really in this country. There's just a lot of good musicians doing amazing stuff. So yes, I suppose kind of diving into that world was, it was so, just kind of swam through all of those sounds. And you spoke about KZN, and I think that I'm obviously a little bit biased, but for me, it really is the sort of epitome of the Rainbow Nation in the country as a province. because there's just such rich culture
Yeah.
on all sides. We're talking about Deepak just now, and for me, that form of sort of Indian fusion music that he was doing at the time, but certainly the Indian classical stuff was also a form of indigenous music, if you like. I think
Yeah.
that, I mean, obviously Durban has the biggest population of Indians living outside of India,
Yeah.
and I grew up hearing a lot of that music, and yeah, I was also just intoxicated by that as well. So
Yeah. It is. It is totally intoxicating. I mean, you can just like, I just remember being a kid, you know, like somewhere on the South Coast or the North Coast, and you can just like smell it. You can just like sense it in the air.
mm,
And the history, which is something, that you kind of allude to in your music, I find that, but just the connections, and obviously particularly with Nadi, the most recent album with Kannada, that that ancient connection between India and Africa, through modern, like recent history and very ancient history.
mm.
um, and there's just something about that, like standing on a beach, um, whether it's in Durban itself or, like I said, South or North Coast, and you can just like feel it on the air. It's just warm and nourishing,
Balmy, and
balmy.
yeah, and things growing on top of things. It's just so it's so lush and so fertile, and I think that those I'm quite interested in this as well. Those environmental kind of geographical conditions or landscapes, um, by default, have immediate and inherent effects on culture, in this case in music.
Totally.
And I mean, I watched an amazing documentary the other night about Ethiopian music. um, Beautiful, beautiful film, and just talking a lot about the way they navigated physically through the terrain, and how that influenced a lot of the sound and the ability to a move instruments from A to B, and also just the song, the lyrical content, about these journeys. The environment has such an immediate impact
Totally.
on the music and the culture, and I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by that, because it's always going to be unique, and sometimes unique to a small group of people, or
Yeah.
an individual. So
Yeah. And it's like, it's very apparent. It's very there. Like you can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it. But there is a sense, I don't know, as well, that you do kind of have to be open to it, and that's what I'm a little bit interested with you personally, is like, obviously, okay, like Bruce and Paul, your older brothers, we're exposing you to different things, and that's really cool. But there's got to be you've got to be receptive to it, because I mean, I know a lot of people who have never heard of, obviously, I mean, I hadn't heard of Deepak Ram, but don't even know about that kind of heritage in KZN particularly. And then, some, people don't know who Madala Kunene is. And it's, for me, it's a tragedy. It's like, what are we doing? Why are we, and that's something we could talk about a bit later, but like, what do you feel like was something that maybe just allowed you to be receptive to it and even kind of soak it in?
I think I was lucky, man. I think I was lucky. I think I was lucky to have that exposure. A large portion of my life was, and still today, was always spent with people considerably older than me. I mean, I became really close with Nibs van der Spey when I was 16, and he was in his mid-30s. And I had that with quite a few different people. And I think as a result, there was a different generation, and there was a different kind of discerning listener that was maybe being passed on to me. I don't know. I feel that I feel like I was lucky. I feel like I was just born in the right place, and all of that stuff just came to me. And I'm very grateful for it because it's, I mean, just a side note, but kind of on topic. There's a new Busim Tlongo live album, which was live at Awesome Africa 2001, and I was at the concert. Also very young, went to this festival, and I was the only person camping, me and a friend of mine. No one else was camping. It was like 3,000 or 4,000 people. No one camped except us. I remember we made a sign that we stuck on the tent that said "Stealing affects your karma," because there was like just nothing around, and we were just worried that someone was going to hook something because we were in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, we were at this concert, and I remember so clearly that just how profound it was as a
Where was
young
it?
guy. Who was it?
No, where?
Oh, it was in Shongweni.
Oh, dude. Okay.
Yeah, it was an astounding place. Anyway, slight tangent, but just talking about being grateful, and I heard this recording because it just came out like a couple of weeks ago, and just tears, man. I was just so grateful for being there, whatever, really, but just to relive it. Oh man, just like 20 years later, and to go down, and Busi Mhlongo is just, if you don't know who she is, she's just, I don't know who to compare it to.
She's out from outer space, man. She's
from outer space and so powerful.
Yeah.
And that music is just so rich and so real and so sincere and so transparent. And that was a lovely thing to revisit. So a bit of a tangent, but the appreciation and the fortune and the luckiness, I keep saying, for just being around at the right time, in my opinion, it was a good time. Everywhere is the right time. It's always the right time. But at that age, being kind of so influenced by everything, it was a wonderful process.
So I remember you sent me that Busi Mhlongo album the other day, and I remember watching with my cousin who also grew up in KZN, and that's where my connection was through childhood. And he had the DVD, but the live in, what was it? It's not Paris, but it's
it's live in Nantes. Yeah.
And I just remember watching that. I also must have been like 16, and I was just like, what in the world is going on here? Just power, just full raw energy, and just like exceptionally good. She's from Inanda, right? Well, I know she's passed on, but she was from
Inanda. I think so. I think you told me that, actually. I didn't know if she was from Inanda, but I remember that she was living just outside the city at one point, but I'm not sure what. I'd love to reverse the question to you. What is it that for you that had this affinity and this connection with and maybe KZN, particularly for you, or just the music?
Yeah, I mean, my parents are from KZN, from Durban, but I was born in Joburg. But since I was a kid, we always would go to KZN to see family, and so to the coast, and then also to the Midlands, close to the Drakensberg, kind of Giant's Castle area.
Lovely.
And also and to Weenan, just outside, to the actual nature reserve, just outside, in between Escort and Weenan town itself. And yeah, I mean, it was just going to that farm as a child since I was born, and my grandparents were from KZN, and so there was always that journey. There was the trip down the N3, and so it was like, oh, cool, I'm going into like this wonderland,
magic land.
Yeah, and that's just what it was. And I think a massive thing was that, even though I was raised Catholic, it wasn't like, I didn't come from like a fundamental like religious family, and I was allowed to think for myself, and I was allowed to feel for myself. And I think that therefore I was receptive to it, and I was open to it, and I would sneak off and like go hang out with people that maybe I shouldn't be hanging out with. and um and that just grew and grew and grew. And I mean, you can't help but, you know, I'm at the first I saw rock, you know, sand rock art in the Drakensberg when I must have been 6 or 5, and it was just like, you know, and I was like,
Wow.
what the fuck is this? You know? Like, this is who made this? And in here, like this deep in the mountains, and
Mm.
and then, you know, you driving through those areas, like, well, depending, I mean, whether you go through Zululand or whether you go through certain parts of throughout KZN, you're like, who are these people? What is the story here? You know, what has been going on? And then, of course, there's so much pain. There's so much,
Mm.
like, just terrible things that have happened, obviously, all over the world, you know, but obviously we're talking about KZN. And obviously that contrast was always interesting.
Mm.
And that polarity, which is something we live with in South Africa, which is another thing we can get into later. But it was just like, I was like, what is going on? Then I'd go back to Joburg, you know, and it'll be like school and like da 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 in the city. And I was like, no, but that place is where it's at. So I think going to those places, um, and just being open to it and receptive. And then I think the big one was then going to live there as a boarder, you know, at boarding school at Hilton College, which is one of the most ridiculous places on the planet. I mean, that, you know, just into the Mgeni Valley, which is one of the oldest consistently inhabited valleys in the world, you know.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
And you're just like, what? Who were these people? And I think that was
Mm.
a massive exposure. And then finding other people who were connected to that. And like I say, and I mean, you were one of those, or you are one of those people. And that was through the music. And my cousin was a big influence as well. You know, he grew up, you know, he can speak Zulu. He went through his twasa as you know, to become a sangoma. And, you know, he was a field ranger. And so he was taking me to all these different places and exposing me to Madala Kunene and Busi Mhlongo and, you know, all the different, the rock art sites and the like the Zulu heritage sites. And then I studied archaeology I just wanted to know more and more and more about KZN. I wanted to know as much as I could, you know, and there's just so much fascinating, just mind-blowing stuff.
Mm.
So I think when we met, it was like that was the meeting point. You know, I was like, dude, and it was like, you know that stuff too, you know. And then obviously through you, I've met a whole bunch of other people who who've had that same kind of flame, you know,
Mm.
for for that for that place and that story and the people and the sounds and the tastes and the flavors and
Mm.
so I mean, for me, I think that's the art, right? Like that's getting like the drunk on the art of
Mm.
the place, the culture, the but here's an interesting one where it kind of into craft, uh, is that someone like Nibs was obviously and still is, you know, obviously a dear friend and a sharer of that love and that chias, but he was obviously a teacher for you and still is in some ways.
Mm. For
But
sure.
like, when did you decide to? Obviously, I mean, I know there might not, or maybe there was a defining moment of like, okay, I actually want to start playing this stuff now. I've been drinking it in. Now I want it to come out.
I think also at the same time, I think that all happened quite simultaneously and quite naturally. I was already playing. I started playing guitar when I was 10. And I'm going to say that I was probably exposed to a lot of this music we've been talking about from when I was maybe 13. So I was already kind of proficient. I mean, not proficient. I was playing quite a lot at that. I mean, I was playing crazy amount back then, sort of all day. So the transition to try and distill or realize or inhabit some of those sounds, for me, I'm going to say the word sounds particularly because it's different to traditional style. Because I'm very interested in the sound particularly, but I think that process was, it's just totally natural, and I think also playing by ear a lot. I would just be listening to the music, and what I used to do as well was I used to play along with it quite often, and then listen to the guitar player or listen to the bass player a lot, or listen to the singer and just try and work out what's happening. Melodically or rhythmically, and that whole thing kind of just kind of evolved as it did. I wish I had like a better answer for you, but I think that is the truth. It was very much just osmosis once again, and being surrounded by that and kind of swimming in it. And then a good friend of mine said to me once, which I appreciated, you got to be very careful what you listen to, because you never know, you might end up playing that. And he was making a reference to, in his opinion, music he didn't really appreciate. I think using that same analogy, it was music that I was constantly kind of immersed in. The process of emulating or understanding further just happened naturally. So yeah, and go back about the sound thing is that there was never any sense of tradition or style that I was aligned to. I was always way more interested in the amalgamation. For me personally, it was like, oh yeah, you can spend 30, 40 years of your life practicing the sitar, but you're never going to be like Ravi Shankar. And it's not a competition, of course, but I realized that perhaps I had something else to offer by bringing that instrument to different spaces. And that particularly interests me because a lot of cross-cultural collaborative works interest me musically, but they also interest me in terms of what happened. I know working with Kanada Nadahali, the sitar player I made a record with last year, how difficult it was on so many fronts in terms of our cultural references. He did, like I said, we were trying to work on a cover of The End by The Doors because it's kind of raga-esque, and I'd worked out the guitar part a little bit, and I remember playing him. There's a live in Toronto of The Doors doing this in like '67 or something, and he was just, what's going on the stage? And first of all, he had no idea who The Doors was. He had no idea, and then so amazing references, and then I didn't have an idea about so many things. He introduced me to Kaushiki Chakrabarti and Kishore Amonka, and really got me into Niladri Kumar as well. But what I'm getting at is how difficult it was initially. Maybe for me more so because of, not just because of our references or because of our cultural differences, but because musically we were trying to align, and there was just misfires at times, especially in the beginning, and then eventually we got it. And why I'm saying all this is that I'm quite fascinated in why we got it, and in the persistence of us actually doing it, how we got it, and grateful for the work that we did to make it pay off, because I almost gave up. I think it was our fourth rehearsal, and I was like, I don't know where the one is. Where's the first beat of the bar? Well, how is this melody being phrased? I'm just so confused. And then it was just a buch. And I think talking about all of these musics from KZN and South Africa, swimming them all together and creating something new in terms of the idea of there being a Rainbow Nation, I think is quite beautiful. And
well, I think I mean, that's the point, right? Is like, what can we through I mean, even though it wasn't like a personal conflict or anything, but through tension and conflict, through contradiction,
Yes.
If
Yeah.
you can like allow yourself to just take a moment and
Mm.
really listen, hear, and feel and perceive with clarity, then all of a sudden you can be, you know, in a way in the other person's shoes to a certain degree, or at least sense what they're sensing and hear what they
Sure.
hear. And
And that's a very healthy process, because you automatically remove yourself from whatever bubble that you may have been in, or perception of yourself and of others. It's just there's a learning that's going on that's quite profound, and I think quite insightful and quite humanistic, in the sense where there is a coming together and an understanding more than just a simple greeting.
yeah,
I think I really got to understand um, Kannada quite well, and also sort of his background, because he comes from the south of India. He's just outside Bangalore, and most of the time that I had spent in India had been in the north, and there's quite a big difference between the two.
mm.
Yeah.
So to go back a bit, to kind of before, like when you picked up the guitar, you know, like why did that happen? When did that happen? And also, like maybe just to like obviously you mentioning Ravi, so and I mean obviously I know you, and you mentioning the Doors, and we've spoken about this thing a lot. But like, you know, what the Beatles were doing by going to India, and you know, particularly what George Harrison was doing as well, um, and yeah, I mean obviously and Led Zeppelin and that kind of thing. But so before you were kind of getting completely drunk on the local stuff, what was like some of the influences before that that made you maybe pick up the guitar, or what was the, yeah.
I mean, definitely all those artists you mentioned. I was completely consumed by Led Zeppelin for a long time, in such a transformative way, particularly their acoustic stuff, and also their stuff that sort of, you know, sort of leaned a little bit towards the east. I think that was an interest for me, purely because, once again, there was a cross cultural thing happening there. I mean, in the UK and in India, there's obviously long history. So, um,
And you just like Lord of the Rings.
and I just like Lord of the Rings. Exactly. I love how they just drop Gollum once in a while. They just, you know. But yeah,
And
lots
those
of different.
evil walks. Sorry, you were saying.
That's funny. Um, and
I'm pretty
then
sure that is what he says. Sorry, that he says, Gollum
exactly what he
and
said.
those evil walks.
It's fantastic. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, and then lots of stuff, man. I got into a lot of reggae back then as well. I was listening to a lot of folk music, I guess, as well, for a long time.
Mm.
And then I got into the guitar stuff, and that was another whole transformative thing. But I think it was funny. It was something I said the other night, and I'm hoping it relates to this. Was if I hear someone DJing at at a party, or at their house, the thing that I appreciate the most is diversity.
Mm.
It's like, oh wow, he played that, and they're like, oh wow, geez, how did that happen?
Mm.
I really enjoy that, man, and I think the same goes for my curiosity as a kid. Was just that, how much of this can I consume? I really got into Celtic music at one point, and I went quite deep into some bluegrass stuff. It was kind of all over the place, and I think that it was really healthy. It was one thing that whenever people ask me, oh, and I'm grateful for it. But where does all this stuff come from? I'm like, just listen to some music. There's a lot of great music, and it's not about emulating or just repeating. It's about actual understanding,
Yeah,
because music is so transparent and holds memory so well,
totally.
and culture. So yeah.
Very nice. The and like what like did someone did you get a guitar as a gift? Did like Paul or
Ah,
Bruce have one, or did you just pick a
yes.
friend have one, or?
Yeah, I ended up kind of hijacking my older brother's guitar, and I never gave it back. Uh, I've still got it as well. And yeah, I mean, both of my older brothers were playing guitar, and my mother and my sister were playing piano,
Nice.
and so there was kind of a bit of music in the house,
Mm, mm.
generally.
And was Nibs your first like official teacher, like actual guitar teacher, or?
I had another teacher before Nibs who was also kind of equally profound. We just had less time together. I ended up going and studying with him later on. A guy named Leandro Stavro, who just an amazing classical guitar player and also quite open. I mean, I would go there and bring pretty obscure stuff to the party, and he would always kind of be happy to transcribe or at least share in it with me. And then I studied with Nibs van der Spey for a long time, and then went back after I studied at. I never know what the name of that place was called, man. I spent a year of my life there. Was it called DUT? I think it was called something else back then. Campus in Durban,
Mm.
Technicon, something. It had a name. I'm terrible that I don't know. And then I went back after that and studied with Leandros at the Durban School of Music, studying classical guitar, actually, which I did for about a year.
Nice. And because this is kind of the, you know, the very interesting thing, and I've always said it to you, like, obviously from my background, studying, you know, my initial kind of attraction is like, oh wow, you know, look at that movement, like that is like absolute freedom of expression, you know, and you fall in love with that, and and then you meet those people who are, you know, some of them are teachers, because that's an interesting thing, like in our two backgrounds, you know, in obviously in terms of movement, like you've got, you know, you've got performers, you've got dancers and this kind of thing, and it's obviously the same in music, and but a lot of the people that I have studied with until more recently weren't really performers. They were like, you know, teachers, and so yeah, it's like fall in love with the movement, and then, you know, they teaching what they do, and then you're like, oh well, this requires like a lot of hard work, this requires a lot of determination, this requires a lot of focus, this requires a lot of patience, this is going to break me, like this is literally going to fucking break me. And I think that's what I'm so fascinated by, is the learning process. And you know, in your case, like you're soaking in all the stuff, you know, osmosis, drinking it in, like full to the brim, and diversity, you know, so much. Like people be like, how can you listen to, you know, reggae and Indian classical music at the same time? And I know me and you are like, well, actually, you should put them together.
That's what I was about to say. You know, and I can actually send you some stuff.
And so, so, but now, how do you distill it, right? That's the thing. How do you distill and create something with it that is actually, that actually makes sense, and that is accessible and relatable, and doesn't have to be, obviously not everyone's going to get it, and that's totally fine, but
Yeah. Most of the time they're not. Well, not they. Most of the time it goes. It's a little bit left of center.
yeah, so that I've always said to you, like, wow, how does someone have so much like creative gees, but also the ability to work really hard and be incredibly focused? And that was my naivety. And also like, for me, I've reflected a lot on, like, I didn't, and this isn't, I'm not having the pity party if everyone listening, but like, I didn't start with my craft at a young age. And this has been a massive conversation that I've had with all my teachers, because all the teachers that I've ever had with what I do started really young. Like if they weren't like 5 or 6, they were then 10 or like maybe, early teens.
If I could just quickly jump in there,
Yeah.
I think that yes, that you didn't start your actual what is it, what it is that you
what I do.
Practice that you do now, but also how it's evolved. But you speaking earlier about your trips to
Totally.
something started there.
Yeah. No, the love, the other art, the
Yes.
and I'm using this is a conversation I have with Tom Wexler, right? Who's going to be on the podcast soon as well. He talks a lot about this kind of art and craft, and what is it that then allows someone to create something and to distill it? You know what I mean? To actually, because everyone can appreciate different forms of art. Everyone can watch dance and go, wow, or listen to a piece of music and go, wow, or what a food, or literature, whatever it is, all, and even more than that. And some people are cool to just go, well, that's fine, like, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not actually going to pursue the craft of it. I'm not interested in creating anything, and that's totally fine. We need
of course
diversity of people, and I would even argue though that those people have something that they are that is their craft, that they are very good at, whether that's mathematics. I'm like, well, everything, because what it's coming down to basically is the points I'm trying to get across is patience and hard work and discipline and commitment and that, but that has to be coming from a place of love, like for the art. It has to be coming from a place of like, otherwise it will. Yeah.
And exploration and discovery and interest. Like for me, trying to define or create or perfect something with the instrument, or attempt to perfect something with the instrument, it was certainly sometimes a bit taxing. But if it was something that was just constantly uphill and wasn't giving me any joy, I would never do it.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that you were talking about the idea of the love of it, and the immersement, the compassion, the beautiful self-discovery in the process, is often more interesting to me as a writer than having to play it to an audience, because the man, there's just all cylinders firing.
That's where the magic is, in the process, right? Not the actual product.
And that is such a beautiful way to composing and in your instance kind of moving is such a beautiful way to distill all of those synapses, or like fire and real human essence into sound. So in my instance, it's lovely.
Yeah. So this is the thing though, is like, okay, where I was going with like the hard work thing, and is the, I mean, if you were to take a guess of how many hours you've spent playing the guitar or the sitar or playing an instrument or listening to music, how, like, do you reckon you could put that into a percentage of your life? Like,
yeah, definitely quite a large percentage. Quite a large percentage. I know we sleep quite a bit as humans, but I think even in my sleep sometimes, ideas happen, and unpacking of whatever happens. Sure, I don't know the answer to that question, but a lot.
Yeah. So now this is the really interesting thing of where we're at, like in today's world, is that we're completely overwhelmed by content and information and products, right? And through whatever's happened, like, you know, our capacity to consume has expanded exponentially. And I remember, like, you know, when I was learning, because for me it's exactly the same. I should have maybe said this earlier. Learning the instrument, which I've obviously also been doing, like learning the guitar
Mm,
and the voice a little bit, um and the body, it's the same thing. It's the instrument is the same. It requires tuning, it requires love, it requires nurturing, it requires the
mm,
same ability to listen and to be open and to be explorative and curious
mm, mm.
and to be in it. And um when I first started moving, I was so obsessed, you know, and this is like obviously being massive from like to learn about my own ego and my personality and my temperament and this kind of thing. But I was so obsessed with the product, you know, so focused and driven on like the end goal, the end result, because I was so used to consuming. And um you know, one of my teachers who really like challenged me, it was like, you know, Dave, you speak of Guy and you speak of Jonathan Wilson and you speak of me and all your other teachers, and you appreciate and you see the intricacies and the details and the work necessary, but like, where are you at with what you're creating? And it was such like I was like, whoa, fuck, you know, because I'm very good at taking on, I can mimic, you know, and I can understand people's methods and I can embody it. Um, and it was such a massive moment for me, and it broke me completely because I
Can
had
I,
to.
can I ask you, but what age were you when that conversation happened as well?
Yeah,
It's quite relevant.
yes, a few years ago,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
I'm so grateful for it. It's not a negative thing at all. It's an incredibly
No, no, not at all. But I think that there is a process of appreciation of of masters or people who've come before who've pioneered
totally
something. I mean, there's a beautiful and there's a wonderful very strange guitar player named Robbie Basho, kind of esoteric guy, did some weird stuff which I really like, and he said something beautiful for me, just in aligning with what you're saying, and is often the path that you walk, that is very much your own path, has been cleared by someone else before, you know.
totally.
And I think that there's some beauty in that because it's quite humbling. The fact that you're not inventing the wheel here, you
No,
know.
no,
And I think that you're a perfect example of that. I think that you've done exactly the same thing. You've funneled in so much stuff, and even your, you know, your archaeological stuff has an impact into the way that you navigate not only the world but your practice and all of these things. I think it's obviously that moment when this teacher said that to you was quite a, and that's cool because it's quite confrontational in a way, because you then you have to, you know, look at yourself. There's an internal dialogue that's inevitable. But I also think that there's something beautiful about being a student. You know,
totally. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
we're
it,
always students.
yeah, absolutely, you know. And I, the moment for me was just it was an acknowledgement of like, yeah, and not that I'm not saying like, oh, look at me, I'm now creating something, but
No,
and like,
but you are, but yeah.
but I'm just, it's that process of like actually being vulnerable enough to, yes, channel your influences, but to, yeah, to put your own thing, you know. And I know I'm one, I love that book and about Steal Like an Artist. And you know, of course, everything is, I mean, I'm reading the book now, Free Will by Sam Harris, which is absolutely brilliant, and it's tiny, it's beautiful little book. And he's just talking about how everything is predetermined. in terms of, not in terms of like some kind of supernatural predetermined, but by our chemistry, by our,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and
And
anyway,
that's
that's a whole
quite
nother
humbling
thing.
stuff too.
It is humbling. That's the point. There's a
Yeah.
sense of surrender, right?
Mm,
And there's a,
mm,
and, and, um, and a sense of deep peace that, and contentment that comes with that.
mm.
Um, but yeah, it's just like, I think what's interesting in the main thing that I'm trying to explore and excavate a little bit more, and I think it would be interesting, like you've got listeners, right? And people who listen to what you do, whether that's at a live gig or, you know. Now for me, I facilitate classes, or, you know, there's, maybe it's one-on-one, maybe it's a group of people. I mean, you know, we've done our thing together a number of times. And it's just interesting, like sometimes sometimes it's about facilitating an experience where people can just experience themselves, and that's, you know, that's the main root, that's the joy, that's like the beauty, that they're experiencing their body, the music, their own movements, and you're just holding that space for them to do that, and that's wonderful, you know.
Mm.
And then there's the other, you know, people want to learn not what you do exactly, but what you do, you know. So like, I know a lot of people ask you, oh Guy, I really want to play your one song, you know, and now you're transcribing it or whatever. And sometimes what happens in the learning process, and obviously you've been through this as a student, is, you know, you hit walls, and you like, the hours of practice are completely like, can become overwhelming, you know, and you're like, oh, I'm not getting it, I'm not getting it, I'm not getting it. And so what would you say has been your like strategy to when you've hit those walls or had blocks, whether it's creating something new, or even like practicing old stuff, or trying to learn something new? What would you say is the thing that like brings you back from, you know, going over the edge a little bit?
I think what sometimes is, it's a good question. I think sometimes for me, what brings me back, it sounds slightly counterintuitive, but is to just look forward, in a way where I feel, one thing that has happened to me that I think after playing the instrument for 25 years now, is that I am I am less easily amused, and that troubled me for a long time. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to make things more complex, or it doesn't mean that I'm trying to oversimplify. It doesn't mean that I don't have any expectation of what that means. But what it did become apparent to me, what it meant was to do something new, to do something different, to do something else. And I've really been trying to do that the last few years. So to answer your question, I've never been a very good practicer. I've never sat and done scales. I very seldomly sit and warm up for more than like 3 minutes. I know people who take that stuff very, very seriously, and I respect that. I think that's a great regime. Um, for me, music's always been um, quite a catharsis, and I think having the pleasure and the luxury of immersing myself in that was always more of a vehicle and a vessel and a transformative tool than it was for me to sit down and really try and nail one specific technique or
Right.
one specific idea. I think that that's a wonderful, devoted, beautiful form of communication that lots of musicians have. It's just never been my focus, and I know that when I am, for example, on a long tour and I've done like 20 gigs, I know I'm playing better. I know I'm way more free here because I'm on top of it. and I appreciate that, and I think that that's always something to strive for, at least at that kind of level. But the interest of really nailing something, of really getting it 100% right, was never really much of an interest for me. I mean, when I listened to like those early Bob Dylan records and how he would just burst into laughter, or he would just totally screw up one note, or he would play like, 5 bars instead of 4 in a 4-beat cycle, I was always like, that's fantastic. It doesn't get more real and sincere and present than that. And I listened to this beautiful Nina Simone record, which I love again this week, live at Town Halls from 1959. It's a really old recording of hers. And there's no other way but to hear that music by being so aware of her presence. She's just so present. She's so in the moment and so carefree. Hi, hello, Clark. We have a guest.
Where's Guy?
I'm Guy. Clark?
We have a guest.
Oh, Sky's outside. Clark, I'm just on the phone, but I'll come see you in a bit. How's that sound? Cheers, my brother.
Classic little guest appearance.
What a champion. What a champion. He's always just running around the farm with the dogs.
Isn't that just that was like a Bob Dylan record right there? Just a little sneaky Easter egg.
It reminds me of that BBC reporter when the kid sort of crawls in. You see that? And the guy's trying to do like a news broadcast. Oh, you haven't seen that? It's classic. I'll send it to you. It's very funny. And this kid just crawls in, like, it's very, very funny. But yeah, so I think that was always an interest for me. That very present, very, very still. I mean, also that Nina album is just full of like terrible, but some very skewed pitching on the voice and some very weird. And mostly a lot of people would consider kind of wrong notes. I love it. For me, it's just, that's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear something too polished.
So this is the interesting thing though, is like, I mean, I'm totally with you when you were talking earlier about the magic of being in the process, like of whether that's playing or, and you made an interesting thing about practice, but I would say that your practice is just different.
Yes. Yeah, it's just different.
But yeah, and like for me, that's what I've always loved, like in terms of appreciating particularly music. I'm like, no, give me the weird documentary that they filmed in between the recordings, and I want the B-sides of that. Can I get that? That would actually be where the sweet is.
Excuse me. Absolutely.
But
I think I'm the same.
Yeah, and it's like, because it's like, what's the, like what inspired the poem? What's the reference? What inspired the song? Where did that come from? And because it's just an endless, isn't it? It's just an endless rabbit hole that just keeps linking.
It is an endless rabbit hole, but there's some beauty in understanding those processes, and I think we both have an interest in that. And I'm not interested in it for kind of just for historical reasons, although there's some interest there. But I'm interested in the joining of the dots emotionally. Spiritually, in some profound way, how this piece of art, poem, film, music, dance came to be. I think that's certainly an interest for me.
So you were saying about practice, and I was saying I think you just practice differently.
Yes.
And also, it's 25 years. This is the point that I'm trying to get across to myself. And to share with people that like it takes presence is the point, right? It takes love and commitment and compassion and patience. But so maybe though, when you were younger, okay, you played along to a lot of stuff and you obviously figured out a lot of stuff by yourself. But with Nibs and with that, how did you say his name?
Leandros. Yeah.
I dig his Stavro. I dig the surname.
Yeah.
Was he Portuguese?
Leandros, I think, has Greek heritage.
Greek, right. Okay.
Pretty sure it's not Portuguese, but I think so. Yeah.
I mean, you must have spent, like a lot of time chipping away. No?
I did. I spent a lot of time chipping away. It's funny because I have had this question a few times, and it just never felt like practice. It never did because
Yeah.
this
Sorry,
is the
carry on.
thing. I mean, yeah. I mean, I know it's maybe semantics there in terms of what the meaning of the word is, but what I would do is I would learn 3 or 4 songs every day. And not that they were like really, really difficult, or they were, sometimes they were for sure, but I just wanted to be in it, you know? And
Yeah.
maybe that was my practice. I think maybe I'm learning something here too in terms of the meaning of the word.
Yeah,
It
it's not a
certainly wasn't like, okay, cool, now for 20 minutes, I'm going to run all of these scales and imprint them in my mind. I never did
sure.
that.
Well, but
Yeah.
this is my point, is that your craft is based on a deep love for the art.
Yes, I agree with that. I
Like
think
you
so,
love
yeah.
it. You love it, you know. It's like
Yeah. And
um
it's also, I don't always see such a separation from myself and it as well, without sounding too kind of cerebral there. But like, I think that it's quite natural, and it's also something that I'm just inclined to do, you know. I don't
well,
know.
this is where, you know, this is the thing, is that after, like, with a deep love, and after years of doing it and embodying it, it becomes natural, you know. and
Yeah,
and and
yeah,
and this is where I think a lot of people make a mistake in terms of like, oh yeah, talent, you know, like the people
yeah.
don't understand talent. Like, it's like, no, talent doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. You might
I
have
don't think so.
some genetic, like, you know, benefit, like things on your side or whatever, but
Yeah,
anyone who is has created something beautiful
yeah,
has dedicated the majority of their time or their life to it.
yeah. I agree with that. I think that, and I think you would probably agree with, and you've seen it a lot. And I've even hear you made reference to certain people who just did align with something, or grow very quickly or whatever. But in my head, anyone can sit in a room with an instrument and and just lock themselves in for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours a day, doing the one thing.
Mm,
Um, I think that anyone can do that. I think that the idea of talent is something different. Well, talent's maybe not the right word. Um, some kind of individualistic kind of voice. It doesn't have to be massively pioneering. It doesn't have to change the world. It might not even need to be seen or heard by anyone else. But there's something there that they, as individuals, are bringing to the party,
totally, yeah.
bringing to the moment. That for me
And that's what keeps
is a
it
beautiful.
interesting and beautiful, yeah, and humbling
Yeah,
and
sure.
inspiring. But now, okay, why do you think? I mean, I'm not. It might sound like I'm making an assumption, but I know for a fact, because I mean, I feel it in myself and I've seen it in lots of people. Why are we afraid to do that?
Afraid to do what?
To be present like that, to be vulnerable like that, to let yourself be heard.
I think because stuff comes up and you have to do the work and you have to look at it. And I've actually been dealing with that myself this week. Um, just aware of certain things about myself, which, whether or not I'm by myself or with others or with my instrument, those same issues, problems, discomforts is a better word, come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I often thought that as a result of exterior factors that thing would reveal itself. And I've realized this week, I mean, it's still kind of a new thing I'm sort of boiling over with, but I realized that, you know, those aspects of yourself will always come up. And I think particularly with something like craft that we're talking about here, there's no way to avoid the internal dialogue.
Mm.
and sometimes it's not so easy, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one of the things why people have, because when you go vulnerable like that and you go into that space, you know, you opening up stuff, and I think that sometimes it's not always easy to hear what's there.
Yeah, and I mean your own, exactly, and I think the biggest thing, obviously, that happens, one of the biggest things is obviously that, you know, criticism, you know,
Yeah, that's true.
and the fear of, and like you said, I mean, I don't even know if it's so much like, oh, this person said they don't like what I do or whatever. It's how you internalize that. It's how, like,
Yeah,
you know, how you
yeah.
think that, how
I
you
think
think
for
people are going to
me,
think, and that, I think that stops, that suppresses a lot of things.
mm,
It just stops you from even attempting.
I think for me, a lot of the music that I've put out into the world, I think I felt quite free always being on the fringes in terms of not making mainstream music, where I had a lot more freedom to do anything because there wasn't really much expectation. I don't think, and I think the I was always aware that whatever I was going to put out was quite likely that it would not appeal to most people. And I think, once again, I felt quite free by that. And I think that when criticism would come, it's not like, oh, you don't get it because I'm doing something so niche. It goes over your head. It's not even that. It's not that at all. It's the fact, like, yeah, of course. Not many people are into, like, you know, a 20-minute sitar raga, you know, with a long one chord tempura drone going for 20 minutes. That's not everyone's cup of tea. So when there was the few people that did like it, I'd be like, oh, cool. You know what I mean? Like, it was quite wonderful, not being so being quite uninhibited because of that. Just talking about, you mentioned criticism. Obviously, it's not easy, and it's hard. Like, I mean, I'm putting out this record tomorrow, and it's the first time I've ever done anything kind of more full scale electronic. There's a bit of apprehension.
I want to put my remix in. I fucking had the remix ready. Been waiting years. Buttery goes
God.
EDM.
Oh my God, it's certainly not EDM, but anyway. And I suppose there's some apprehension about, you know, like going into different things like that. But, man, you know, someone's going to like it and someone's not going to like it. It's the same thing with, some people really don't like avocado, you know, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and this is the thing, I think, where I've actually sworn a few times on this podcast. I wonder if I'm going to get
Savage.
like Spotify is going to search it before they, what do they, like,
Oh, they put a little, like, E,
get the
a
little
explicit.
E.
Yeah.
But this is where people, you know, maybe where the saying, you know, in the modern term, you know, of giving no fucks comes from. And I think people, when they first hear that, they think like, oh, like, so you must just be arrogant and, like, you know, pretentious and like, oh, I'm an artist and, like, listen, you know, I don't care what people. And it's really the complete opposite of that, isn't it? It's like, it's
a letting go, I think. It's a letting go of, hey man, like, you can't please anyone all the time. I'm trying to think of the Bob Dylan quote, and it's fantastic, but I'm going to screw it up, so I'm not even going to attempt it. But it talks of that exact thing. You know, I think that, huh?
No, carry on.
I think that, oh, well, there's another quote that he does, actually, that I won't screw up, that he says, I used to care, but things have changed.
You also had another one, which was, be groovy or leave, man.
I don't know that one. That's a good.
Be groovy or leave.
But yeah, I think that, yeah, man. I think that I think going into that vulnerable space and having your own personal catharsis, whether it needs to be heard or shared with everyone else, it's almost irrelevant. But I think that there's something quite ballsy about just putting it on the line like that as well. And I respect that. You know, I respect someone who's got their own musical voice, their own muscle of their own sort of musical muscle of ideas, even if it's not something that I resonate with. If it's got its own kind of sound and and you can hear that they've dug deep to pull that stuff out, I automatically have respect for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then it's you know, I know in like I'm just such a douchebag sometimes in my life. Like looking back at a few moments of like when I've just been so judgmental, you know, and so critical because I just wasn't willing to listen. I wasn't willing to drop my preferences and my prejudice and my like, oh, but I only like this kind of music, you know? I mean, dude, you played me Father John Misty and I was like, no, guy, no. And I was listening to Jonathan Wilson, like, you know, and but I was like, no, this isn't, I can't. And then like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? It's just, I've done
Well,
that.
I mean, it's just,
And I've
yeah.
done that a lot in my life. I've, you know, scoffed at things and it's like, why do that to yourself? Why? And it's also like, because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. And you're wanting to protect supposedly this thing that you believe in and like, oh no, I only listen and I like this music and this musician's the greatest. And if I believe that, then it's true. And it's like, dude, just
I don't even know if it's a question of, I don't even know if it's a question in your instance, knowing you that it's a question of ego. Like, oh no, this is what I believe. I think there's also just something about really being immersed in it, where there is a belief, you know, and I don't think it's about that's wrong, this is right. It's more just like, oh, this is so right, so lovely, you know.
Yeah. I'm in my
I,
spirit.
I remember I went to Sri Lanka and I spent 2 weeks in this monastery there in the middle of the island. And a friend of mine had gone out there and he had become a monk and he was living in a kuti there. He'd been there 4 or 5 years and had gone quite deep into Buddhism and his own practice. And there was one thing that he said that always stuck. There were many things that he said that stuck with me, but the one thing that I appreciated, and talking about what you just said now, was he said that you're constantly, all the time, even right now in this instance, aware of the things that you like and dislike. You know, like, you know, I've seen this picture of your head and it's slightly to the left of that staircase. And I keep thinking how it's slightly symmetrical. I'm looking at your image right now. You know, I'm using it as a simple example. But there are constantly things that we are either aware of liking or disliking. And he was implying how to free yourself of that is one of the greatest gifts you could give yourself. But he said it's almost impossible to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is where now it's taken us about an hour, but now we're getting into the deep end.
But it's true.
It's totally true, man. And that's you know, been my I guess like lifelong like quest, you know, in a way. Is like we talk about all the stuff that we love and appreciate and like, but it's like, how can it also just be with like just no anything, you know? And I think that's another thing that, and we've spoken about this before, that we both love about music is the space within it, the silence within it, the gaps within it, you know? And I mean, I know me and you, we both spend a lot of time in natural environments alone, in silence, you know, whether that's the forest or walking or mountains or beach or wherever, whatever you can. And obviously looking at a lot of birds, but the the point is that the like silence is crucial. And of course there's no such thing as silence. It's not in the way that people understand it in like a vacuum sense, but it's like, as much as it's impossible to and that's also what Sam Harris is saying in this free will book, like you think you have free will, like you think you can, oh, I'm enlightened and look at me freeing myself from my likes and my dislikes and pain and pleasure.
Yeah.
But at least you can become aware of that process
Yes.
somewhat,
Yes.
like not to its deep intricacies, but on the kind of, with this tool that we have, you can become aware of it and you can notice it. And then I find that there is a kind of stillness and a kind of silence that comes into that space, because you can watch this thing happen, and while you're watching it, it's just like you kind of, like Homer Simpson, you just become the hedge.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I had this very conversation with a friend of mine this week, talking about when there are things that come into your periphery, when there are things that come into your consciousness, and sometimes they consume you. Quite often they consume you, and there's just this woo spiral of many things, upward and downward. I think that if you can just have that moment of stepping back and just being slightly mindful of it, just observing it a little bit, there is a sense of stillness in that. And I think also a sense of a wonderful sense of kind of unimportance of the thing that you're probably worried about. I know this is a sort of common practice, but I had to do it quite extensively this week for a variety of reasons, and had to observe myself in some ways, which was very difficult, but also very rewarding once I pushed through. The answer for most of these problems in my head, and you said it just now, was if you can kind of find yourself in the natural world, it's the environment really, really, really does make it so much easier. I don't know. I do know why, but I don't always know how. But it really just, if you give yourself that time, it's such a powerful tool.
I mean, I like the word suspension. In a lot of like the traditional practices, coming from the East, suspension is a word that's used a lot, like the suspension of the activity, of the liking and the disliking and the projecting and the receiving. And I think what happens in nature is that, of course, there's so much being projected in the natural environments. And I used to have a very idealistic, romantic idea of nature. I mean, you could be out there and get, taken out by a mamba, or nature is, that's the nature of it. It is as destructive as it is constructive and soothing and life-giving. It is.
Birth and rebirth and chaos and harmony, it's all there.
It's all exploding all over the place. But when you go to most of the time, you can, it's almost like those spaces are somewhat suspended, like the leaves, the wind is blowing and the water's running, and the animals that are there are doing their thing, but there's not like this screen projecting at you. There's not a clock on the mossy floor, there's no people. There's and that allows you, I think, to suspend. It allows you to just like, okay, and now I have a bit of clarity, and I can listen, and I can look at this as impartially as possible, and then decide how I want to take it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I think it's just a wonderful way to step outside of your head and yourself, and all of the things which most of the time we operate and live in quite a heady space in the modern world. What I've been doing of late, I've just been cleaning a lot, and sweeping a lot, and aware of how there's not a big cognitive process there for me, and that's the thing. to just allow for a little bit of, it's almost work that you don't even, you're doing, but you're really not putting any effort into it in terms of sometimes the cleaning can be hard. I don't mean that, but I mean the headspace is quite
straightforward.
It's quite straightforward, and I think that the sort of suspension is a good word. It's kind of, you just kind of doing something, and then there's sort of almost like a scientific fact of things just kind of
No, totally. Distilling, yeah. And I mean, it's the old chop wood, carry water,
Exactly.
And this is a nice one to draw it back into the craft and the art, is that that's what we were kind of talking about, taking in all this stuff, distilling it through the tool. And that is a very one-pointed, focused experience, and then it comes out in some kind of coherent, sometimes coherent way. But yeah, and I know you spoke about grappling with the tools. That was something we spoke about last week. So yeah, I mean, what does that mean in terms of, because the choice of the word grappling is interesting, because sometimes it's not straightforward. That's what we're trying to say.
Sometimes it's not, and I think, to be honest with you, once again, I think my practice and my desire and calling to do so is sometimes to step away. I find that if I step away from the instruments sometimes, or the musical process, or the ideas that I have, it's very healthy to have a bit of a bird's eye view sometimes. And I think if you're completely consumed by the process and the practice itself, I think that sometimes you can reach a bit of a dead end, a bit of a stalemate. So I just step away. I just go and do something else. And I think that often that re-entering the process with a new mindset is quite lovely. Like I picked up the instrument last night and have kind of go to vocabulary or go to sounds, and I deliberately was aware of it and deliberately tried to, well, what about if I just do this? And there was just immediately such an amazing sense of rediscovery, and it's such a simple tool. It's something that you don't necessarily, you have to be mindful of it. You have to be aware that there is a stepping away from familiarity. But isn't that just so lovely? Because there's an immediate reinterpretation of oneself, because you're not doing what is typically in place.
Yeah.
And I think I've been doing that for a long time. And not for a long time, but of late, I've really been trying to immerse myself in that. And at times get quite lost, feel quite lost, but then also at times feel quite found, in the sense that I am checking out something new. And that's hopefully something that I love in other artists, and hopefully something that I will be able to continue to do,
Yes, I think there's some, the when it becomes too straightforward or too narrow, you love that focus, you love that ability to hone in and really but that can become exhausting as well. And
I think that also has a threshold. For me, this purely applies to myself. Really, is that it has a lifespan.
Yeah.
I would typically get disinterested in something after some period of time.
Yeah.
And that's good. I find that a good. I'm happy that happens to me.
Yeah. And then that's where you need that, like you said, a bird's eye view. You need that suspension, or just allow yourself to let go of that grip as well, because sometimes you can you'd be holding on to that thing, that idea or that sound or that movement or that person, that partner, or whatever, too tightly, you know. And this is where I think an interesting thing with with artists is the obsessive nature of it, and that can have, well, not of it, the obsessive nature of humans
Yeah.
gets revealed through that process, and therefore and creating a really like too intense meaning, a sense of meaning.
Sure.
I think meaning is very dangerous, you know. I think if you it can be, at least, like if you
I can agree with that for
yeah
sure.
like
I
if
think that when it's because there's
sorry,
attachment.
exactly.
Yeah, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No. And I think that is what happens with I mean, for me, definitely. And it comes from, you know, I mentioned like upbringing, you know, and like growing up religious, but not like I don't know. There's this quest for meaning, and it's exhausting.
Mm.
It's exhausting, you
It
know,
is exhausting.
for
It is.
meaning and purpose, and like I think what's more important is fulfillment,
Mm.
you know.
And that's actually quite sort of instant gratification, really, if you think about it. You know what I mean? Like, just to be fulfilled in the exercise, in the process, in the practice. Um, it's quite a simple thing to do. It's just one of those things that I think that you also have to practice. You know, you have to practice the fact that it's like, oh, you know, I'm just here. I mean, sometimes I sit down and I have such expectations of myself, and they're just not there. You know, we were talking about like 25 years of playing, but then they just disappear, and I'm like, but I could do it so perfectly yesterday. You know,
Yeah,
uh, you know, now I can do something else. What is it? You know,
exactly. And that's why it's a moment to moment, day to day thing, you know. Like,
totally.
you never make it. There's no
No,
making.
and that's lovely. I'm glad to never make it. You know,
Exactly. And also, if you've made it, it can be unmade so quickly. So
yes,
quickly, it just falls apart, you know. And I think that's where people get like really in terms of the arts, and they're like, no, but this is art. And then it's like, dude, just chill, man.
mm.
um, and another
Yeah,
thing, in terms of like the fulfillment and the meaning, I wrote this down the other day, and I was just like, okay, everything is so uncertain always, you know. Before Auntie Rona came to visit, it was as uncertain then as it is now. Like, we've always been living this highly improbable yet somehow possible life on this
yeah,
planet, just flying through the cosmos. um so in all this uncertainty, maybe I can create something of certainty, right? I can chop wood, carry water. Or it can be very elaborate, and it could be music, or it could be a poem, or it could be movement, or it could be entering a relationship, or whatever. Uh,
building a house,
but
or yeah,
whatever, yeah. And and so it's interesting that, like, everything's uncertain, and it's like, okay, well, let me try do something of certainty. But in that process of creating something certain, you experience uncertainty.
yeah, for sure.
Because that's the creative process, that's the chaotic nature of nature.
Mm. Mm.
um and
I think also, I mean, on that note, I mean, I think one thing we didn't really talk about was improvisation. And improvisation, I'm not just referring to the instruments or to music at all. We're improvising right now. You know, we're nothing that we have said is scripted. Nothing has had any. You know, there were ideas about what we were going to speak about, maybe, but I think that the idea to be aware that everything is just
mm,
passing through,
mm,
um, and to just be kind of still in that, I think that that's a wonderful, once again, very humbling and very freeing thing, because, you know, nothing is certain. And I think also within the music, from my side, I always try and leave sections of the music, and not always am I able to do it or that the piece calls for it, which I'm aware of. But typically I try and have spots of well, what's going to happen here, you know? And then there's a vocabulary, and there's the mood, and there's something that I'm alluring to, but I don't always know what the outcome is, and it's not always good either, and that's fine, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's wonderful to have that as a tool or as a practice in itself, just to be able to improvise through the moment, like this conversation, like anything, you know.
Yeah. So I guess it's just this like this balance of you know, of like, oh yeah, I am doing this, like I'm really making this happen, and then like, oh no, wait, I'm really not, you know. It's like I am creating, but I'm actually not. I'm being created, and then like, wait, am I actually being created, or is there just creation? You know, and in the creation, it's also death and destruction.
Yeah.
And it's just navigating that at different times, and it's just like different spaces and different times call for different like attitudes and different approaches. Like sometimes you need the fucking oars. Sometimes you hoist the, you know, the sails. Sometimes you got to two like engines. Other times you marooned on the island. Other times the
sometimes you turn the boat upside down and you just park underneath it. You know?
Why not? The sun, you know. And then the shark comes and nibbles you freaking, and then you got to, you know, and then you're like, oh, I've actually been on land this whole time. It's actually virtual reality.
I love it.
Something like that. Awesome. All right, bro. Well, I mean, we could probably keep going for the rest of time, but it's probably a nice way to end it. And for those listening, come you know, check out Guy's music on the various platforms that you can support him on. That's something we didn't talk about. That could have been a whole nother podcast, the music industry. But yeah, guys releasing a really, he's never released anything like that. Tomorrow. That's exciting. On a named after a thing that I named.
That's true. That's true. And the artwork is also very much influenced by the story that you brought forward to the piece of music. Yeah. It's a very cosmic interpretation of the Zimbabwe ruins, which I was well aware of, but you brought more into my field of view for sure, and you named the track. So yeah, that's true.
Nice little something to look forward to for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then of course we've got the retreat in December, which is going to be lovely considering the whatever this has been. Yeah. But I don't know, bro. Do you want to play a little something to fade us out?
I can do that.
Just to let the people sit and listen. And
got this bad boy.
Beautiful. Oh, is that the old sitar makar?
Yeah, there you go. You can actually see. I don't know how well you can see, but you can see all the beautiful detail they've put in this one. It's quite phenomenal. This is a sitar made by a guy named Javid in Miraj, which is just Miraj, I think, is south of Mumbai or north of Mumbai, not far from Mumbai, and definitely in the state of Maharashtra. Amazing sitar maker. I've been warming up for quite a long time my coconut oil underneath my knee is where I keep it, because you have to have coconut oil to play this thing on the left hand.
Otherwise, you just slice your hand open.
It slices the hand.
But funny story about the sitar. I almost broke it. It's why I did break it.
You did almost break it.
And it had just arrived from India in the postal service, which is a miracle in itself.
It is.
And the best thing is just show us the label there, bro. Is it a label?
How do I see? Can you see?
Yeah, like, they have to turn their heads, but I mean, not everyone's going to watch this. Some people are going to listen. But sitar makar.
Too good. All righty, I'll give you a tinkle. Can you hear the tempura?
Yes,
Is it too soft or too loud?
it's perfect. Lovely. We definitely do have to make that the jingle. I'll have to get on it when.
I can send you a jingle.
And I just had a thought, and I'm sure people, maybe if they watch this or listen to it, they'll go on a little journey there with that. For me, I was just like, of course, man, like it's play, you're playing the instrument.
Mm.
And like we
No,
said,
I mean, a friend of mine, and I've said this to you before, I love it. He said that is the adjective. I mean, that is the verb, sorry. The verb is to play. No one says, oh, should we go serious some music? Should we serious the music now? Let's serious the music. People say play, and that is the idea. And it's wonderful that you brought that up, because I think that's exactly what we've been talking about the whole time, is the idea of play and presence and catharsis and all these things, of course, but really play. Because when you're playing and you're playing with sincerity, I mean, now I'm really kind of making it very heady, playing with sincerity, but there is a sense of presence which is unobtainable in any other way. So
yeah, and it is because play is an interesting thing. It's like people will take it in a way of like making fun of it. They'll be like, oh well, that's just like that's just play. It doesn't
sure.
it doesn't. And it's like that's such a undermining way to look at what play is, because the way I interpret it as well is like everything is play. The universe is on play. It's in action. It's
in play. Yeah.
It's happening. So do you play with it? Do you let it play you?
Yeah.
And I think people have forgotten how to.
Both of those things will happen as well. It will
Yeah.
play you, and you will play with it, and it's just the nature of it.
That's the nature of play. Right?
It doesn't mean that the play is always easy play. I mean, it's there's a freedom in it, but it sometimes, I think, working through the more difficult moments playfully is quite a beautiful process, and I think one which also requires some kind of just being aware of it.
Yeah, actually, it's weird. I haven't looked at the etymology of play. I don't know. I must check it out. What it is. It'd be very interesting to see.
Do that and let me know.
Yeah, but that is it, eh? And it's like knowing how to play when it's hard, and knowing how to play when it's light and fun, and when it's beautiful, and when it's weird, and when it's awkward, and when you've forgotten how to, and
that as well.
No. So nice.
Alrighty, Charles.
Thanks. Thank
No,
you,
it's
guys.
been lovely,
Thank you,
man.
bro.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to put that down. Hopefully it doesn't fall over. Yeah, safe. Stay. No, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, nice to chat.
Very, very cool. Very cool. Stoked.
Mm.
And hopefully, yeah, well, we will. I'll see you soon. And yeah, everyone check out Guy's album coming out tomorrow.
Do that.
Thanks, bro. It was most
Thank
lovely.
you so much, brother. Yeah, have a most beautiful day.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you got
Yeah.
this far.
Yeah, if you did. Nothing but love. Thank you.
Cheers, my brother. Take care, man. Love you back. Cheers, Trommels.